They called it bad luck. A tragic coincidence. A family haunted by grief. But I know better. My name is Hollis, last of the line, and if you're watching this, it means I've finally decided to talk. For over 70 years, every single child born into my family disappeared before they turned 10. Quietly. Suddenly. Without a trace. And the world kept spinning like nothing ever happened. Cops came and went. News stories faded. My parents buried 9 birthdays, 9 bedrooms, 9 baby books, and then had me. The 10th. Growing up, there were no bedtime stories, only bedtime silences. Certain doors stayed locked. Certain questions were punishable. And every year that crept closer to my 9th birthday, the air in our house got heavier. My mom got quieter. My dad started carrying around this look like he was already mourning me. And the worst part? No one outside our house ever asked why. Not the neighbors. Not the school. Not even our pastor, who, fun fact, blessed our house 3 times before abruptly moving to another state. The only thing louder than the silence were the things I couldn't explain, like the attic that creaked when no one was up there. The footprints that appeared outside my window in fresh snow, even when it hadn't snowed in days. Or the closet that smelled like dirt and copper no matter how many times we cleaned it. I wasn't supposed to make it. That much became crystal clear on the night before my 10th birthday. That's when I found the letter. The one hidden behind the fireplace brick. The one not addressed to me, but written about me. And after reading it, I understood one thing. Those kids didn't just vanish. They were taken. And I was supposed to be next. So if you're wondering how I survived when every other Hollis child didn't, sit tight. Because I'm about to tell you something no one in my family ever lived long enough to say out loud. The town where the Hollis family lived was the kind of place people described as peaceful, almost too peaceful. Neat white fences framed every yard, church bells marked the hours, and gossip was considered a form of afternoon entertainment. It was the kind of town where nothing bad ever happened, at least, nothing anyone wanted to talk about. But behind that perfect postcard exterior, something deeply unsettling festered, a rot that started in the heart of the Hollis family and spread through the town like a secret everyone pretended not to know. The houses all looked the same, yet there was one that stood apart, the old Hollis estate, sitting at the end of a crooked gravel road, its windows like empty eyes watching over everything. Children crossed the street to avoid walking past it. Adults whispered when they thought no one could hear. Everyone knew something was wrong there, even if they never said it out loud. The Hollis family had been part of the town since its founding. Their ancestors built the first mill, funded the church, and donated land for the school. On the surface, they were a pillar of respectability. Their wealth came with a certain reverence, and for years, that shielded them from scrutiny. But over time, their reputation began to twist. The first whispers started after the disappearance of the eldest Hollis child, nearly 70 years ago. It was brushed off as a tragedy, an unfortunate accident. The second disappearance raised eyebrows. By the third, the whispers had turned to stories, and the stories became something darker. Parents began warning their kids not to play near the Hollis property after sunset. Some said they'd seen lights moving behind the attic windows long after the family went to bed. Others swore they heard singing, a child's voice, faint and distant, coming from the woods behind the house. Despite all this, the town maintained its mask of normalcy. No one wanted to believe that something evil could exist in a place so ordinary. The police never found evidence of foul play, and the Hollises never spoke publicly about their losses. They attended church every Sunday, donated to local causes, smiled for photographs, and mourned in private. The facade was perfect, almost rehearsed. But behind closed doors, the family name carried a curse, one that everyone in town knew about but no one dared to acknowledge. The irony was that the town's beauty, the manicured lawns, the blooming gardens, the freshly painted fences served as camouflage. It covered up decades of fear, suspicion, and silent complicity. Because the truth was, the town's perfection didn't protect it from darkness. It helped hide it. Over the years, the Hollis name became more than just a family name. It became a warning, a quiet legend passed between neighbors in hushed tones, especially when the wind picked up at night or another child's face quietly vanished from a school photo. The word cursed was never written down, never officially spoken in public, but it hung in the air like smoke after a fire. People said it under their breath, often after a glance over their shoulder. It wasn't the kind of curse you read about in fairy tales. It was subtler than that, quieter, more insidious. The kind of curse that doesn't scream, but whispers. The kind that sinks its teeth into a family and refuses to let go. Everyone in town knew that something was wrong with the Hollis family, but the polite thing was to pretend otherwise. It was always such a shame, all those poor people, but never more than that. Never questions. Never truth. It wasn't just that children in the Hollis family disappeared, it was how it always seemed to happen the same way. Right before they turned 10. No sign of struggle. No trail to follow. One day they were there, and the next, their rooms were empty. Clothes still hanging. Toys still warm from use. And always silence from the family. No crying in public. No pleading for help. Just a tight-lipped grief that made the whole town uncomfortable. And that discomfort turned into fear. Over time, people stopped sending their kids over to play. They stopped inviting the Hollises to barbecues, church socials, school events. The family was still there, still wealthy, still present, but they were ghosts in their own hometown. They walked among people who feared them, not for what they had done, but for what seemed to follow them wherever they went. The strangest part was how the town accepted it. The pattern was clear. The timeline was known. And yet, no one demanded answers. No one pushed for investigations after the third, fourth, or fifth child went missing. The idea of a curse was easier to live with than the possibility of something real, something human, lurking behind the Hollis family's locked doors. So the town did what small towns often do when faced with something too ugly to confront, they buried it beneath pleasantries. The curse became a local myth, a cautionary tale for children who stayed out too late. But beneath the stories and the rumors, there was a silent understanding. The Hollis family wasn't just unlucky. They were marked. And everyone else was too afraid to ask by what. The disappearances of the Hollis children were not isolated incidents. They formed a chilling pattern that no one in the town could ignore, even if they tried. 9 children born into the family, 9 lives cut short in the most mysterious way imaginable. Each child vanished without warning, without explanation, always before their 10th birthday. It wasn't like the usual tragedies people read about or heard on the news. There were no signs of accidents, no evidence of kidnappings, no witnesses to explain what happened. It was as if the children simply ceased to exist, erased from the world in the blink of an eye. The repetition of the number 9 only deepened the sense of dread, like a curse written in stone, carved into the very history of the Hollis family. This wasn't a string of coincidences, it was something far darker, far more deliberate. The fact that every single child disappeared before reaching the age of 10 made it impossible for outsiders to dismiss the pattern as mere bad luck. Friends and neighbors watched as family after family within the Hollis line shattered, holding on to grief that had no name and no closure. The town held its collective breath with each new birth, knowing that the same fate might await the next child. For the Hollis parents, each birthday was a quiet countdown to disaster, a moment filled with dread instead of joy. The innocence of childhood was stolen away before it could truly begin, replaced by a looming shadow that stretched longer every passing year. No one could explain why the age 10 was the cutoff, Why none of the children survived to see double digits? It became a terrifying milestone, a mark that loomed over the family like a guillotine waiting to fall. What made the disappearances even more disturbing was the complete lack of evidence. No clues, no traces of where the children had gone. The family home, where so many memories had been made, became a house of secrets and silence. Bedrooms were left untouched, as if the children had just stepped out for a moment, but never returned. Toys sat abandoned, clothes hung in closets, and beds remained unmade. It was as though the very air of the house refused to accept that the children were gone. Investigations turned up nothing. No footprints leading away, no signs of struggle or forced entry. It was a mystery wrapped in a nightmare, and the longer it went on, the more impossible it seemed that anyone would ever find answers. The disappearances were not just tragedies, they were warnings. And the family knew, deep down, that something was hunting them, something no one else could see or understand. The fact that every Hollis child vanished before the age of 10 was not just a tragic coincidence, it was a haunting pattern that defied all reason and logic. The number 10 became a sinister boundary, a line that none of the children were ever allowed to cross. Each birthday brought with it a mix of hope and dread, a celebration shadowed by the unspoken fear that this might be the last one. Parents watched helplessly as their children grew closer to that critical age, knowing deep down that the clock was ticking faster than it should. It was a cruel twist of fate, as if some invisible force had marked the Hollis children for disappearance the moment they were born. This age limit wasn't just a detail, it was the core of the family's curse, the relentless deadline that shaped every moment of their short lives. No one could explain why age 10 was the cutoff. There were no medical records, no psychological reasons, no external threats that could account for such a precise and consistent timeline. It wasn't illness or accident, nor was it a social or criminal pattern. It was something else entirely, something deeply unnatural. The disappearances always happened just before or on the child's 10th birthday, often without any warning or signs of distress. One day a child would be laughing and playing, the next they were gone without a trace. This unyielding pattern made the story all the more chilling, as it stripped away any hope of randomness or chance. It was as if an invisible force watched over the family, waiting for that precise moment to claim its next victim. And yet, despite the horror of it all, life in the Hollis household went on, because what else could it do? The impact of this age limit went far beyond the vanished children themselves. It shaped the entire family's existence, dictating how parents loved, feared, and protected their children. Birthdays became somber affairs, not celebrations. Gifts were given quietly, as if acknowledging a deadline no one dared to speak aloud. Siblings learned early on not to get too attached, knowing the end might come too soon. The age of 10 was more than just a number, it was a symbol of loss, a barrier between childhood and something dark and unknowable. It hung over the family like a storm cloud, a shadow that followed each new child from their first breath until their last day. No one who lived within the Hollis bloodline could escape the weight of that invisible boundary, and the terrifying certainty that, before the 10th candle on the cake was blown out, their fate would be sealed. Despite the disappearances of every Hollis child before their 10th birthday, no bodies were ever found. This absence of physical evidence only deepened the mystery and horror surrounding the family's curse. It wasn't just that the children vanished, they vanished without leaving a trace. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no hidden graves or abandoned hideouts. The very notion that 9 children could disappear over decades without any tangible clue baffled investigators and terrified the community. The empty spaces where those children once lived became haunting reminders of what was lost but never explained. Every search, every excavation, every lead ended in silence, as if the children had been wiped from existence altogether. This lack of evidence created a chilling void, a gap where answers should have been. Families held on to memories, photographs, and toys, but those were all they had. The police were left with nothing but unanswered questions and dead ends. The townspeople whispered about curses and dark rituals, but no one could point to a definitive cause. Without bodies, there was no closure, no funerals, no graves to visit, no proof that the children were truly gone. It was as though the Hollis children had been erased from the physical world, their stories suspended in a limbo of fear and speculation. This absence fed rumors and paranoia, allowing every theory, no matter how bizarre, to gain traction. The emotional toll of having no bodies was unbearable for the Hollis family. They were forced to live with the agony of not knowing what happened, unable to mourn properly or say goodbye. The void left behind was both physical and psychological, a haunting emptiness that refused to be filled. Every birthday that passed without the missing child's return became a fresh wound, reopened by the knowledge that there was no resting place, no place to lay memories to rest. This absence of proof made the disappearances feel unreal, like ghosts haunting the edges of the family's history. Friends and neighbors struggled to believe such things could happen without explanation, and yet the silence spoke volumes. This absence also created a strange kind of isolation for the Hollis family. Without bodies, without proof, they were left to confront their pain alone, unable to share the grief openly. The community's silence wasn't just fear, it was denial, a desperate refusal to face the dark truth lurking behind the Hollis name. In a way, the lack of bodies was the cruelest part of all, a gap that swallowed not just the children, but the possibility of healing. The police investigations into the disappearances of the Hollis children were extensive, yet frustratingly inconclusive. Despite the growing number of missing children from the same family, law enforcement agencies were unable to uncover any concrete evidence that could explain what was happening. Each time a child vanished, officers arrived to search the house, the surrounding woods, and the town, but no trace was ever found. The investigations yielded nothing, no clues, no suspects, no leads that could point to a possible cause. This absence of evidence baffled investigators and left the family and community trapped in a cycle of fear and unanswered questions. The official reports repeatedly described the cases as baffling disappearances. Standard procedures were followed, canvassing neighbors, checking nearby areas, reviewing surveillance when available, and interviewing family members and acquaintances. But every step seemed to lead nowhere. There were no signs of forced entry into the Hollis home, no evidence of abduction, no witness accounts of suspicious activity. It was as if the children simply vanished into thin air. Over time, skepticism grew among some officers and officials, who began to wonder if the disappearances were linked to something beyond their understanding or jurisdiction. The lack of evidence even led some to suspect that the cases might be unrelated or exaggerated, though the pattern was too persistent to ignore. The inconclusive investigations had a profound impact on the Hollis family. They were forced to live in a constant state of limbo, unable to find answers or justice. The police's inability to solve the mystery deepened their isolation, leaving them to cope with grief that had no closure. Meanwhile, rumors and conspiracy theories filled the vacuum left by the official silence. Some townspeople whispered about cult activity, others about supernatural forces, but none of these theories were ever substantiated. The law enforcement agencies, caught between community pressure and a lack of evidence, found themselves powerless. The disappearances became an unsolved enigma, a dark chapter in the town's history that law enforcement couldn't close. Despite the frustration, the investigations continued quietly in the background, with occasional reviews and new efforts sparked by fresh disappearances. But the lack of progress only reinforced a sense of helplessness and despair. The inability to solve the cases left an imprint not just on the family, but on the town as a whole, shaping how the community viewed the Hollis family and their tragic history. The unresolved investigations became a symbol of the greater mystery, one that no one was prepared to face head-on. There were never any signs of forced entry or struggle when the Hollis children disappeared, which only added to the eerie and unsettling nature of their vanishings. Each time a child was found missing, the house remained untouched, as if nothing had happened. Doors were locked from the inside, windows closed, and nothing appeared out of place. The family home was a picture of normalcy on the surface: no broken locks, no smashed glass, no overturned furniture. It was as if the children had simply walked away willingly or had been taken by something unseen and silent. This lack of physical evidence made the disappearances even more perplexing, because it defied all the typical signs investigators look for when trying to piece together what happened during a kidnapping or an abduction. Neighbors and law enforcement alike were baffled by the fact that no forced entry had ever been reported. No one ever witnessed a suspicious stranger lurking nearby, no strange vehicles parked in front of the house, no unusual sounds or disturbances during the hours surrounding each disappearance. The Hollis home was secure, almost unnervingly so, and yet the children were gone. This strange quietness disturbed those who heard the stories, because it meant the danger was something or someone they couldn't see or fight against. It wasn't a random crime or a violent attack. It was something more calculated, more hidden, and impossible to defend against. The absence of struggle also suggested that the children either knew whoever or whatever took them, or that they were somehow unable to resist. There were no signs of a fight, no scratches or marks on the children's rooms or belongings, nothing that would indicate a violent abduction. The eerie calm of the scene painted a chilling picture. The children vanished without a trace, leaving behind a silence that screamed louder than any noise could. It created an atmosphere of helplessness that weighed heavily on the family and the community. The idea that something could slip into a locked, guarded home and take a child without leaving a mark felt like a violation of every instinct to protect. This pattern of no forced entry and no signs of struggle haunted investigators and the family alike. It erased all the familiar clues people rely on to make sense of disappearances, plunging everyone involved into a fog of uncertainty and fear. It was as if the rules of reality didn't apply to the Hollis family's tragedies, making it nearly impossible to find a path to the truth. This silence, this absence of any sign of violence or intrusion, only deepened the mystery and horror surrounding the children's disappearances. The disappearances of the Hollis children didn't happen in a short span or as isolated incidents. They stretched across decades, forming a pattern that seemed to defy time itself. Each generation of the family faced the same terrifying fate, as if some unbroken curse or dark force reached across the years to claim every child before they could see their 10th birthday. This wasn't just a brief streak of bad luck or a few unfortunate accidents, it was a relentless, unyielding sequence that continued unchanged, like clockwork. The passage of time didn't soften the mystery or bring answers. Instead, it only deepened the shadows surrounding the family's history and the community's collective unease. Decades of disappearances created an invisible thread binding the Hollis family to a fate no one could escape. Older relatives whispered warnings and legends to the younger ones, stories told in hushed tones about the children who never made it past age 10. The family history became defined not by achievements or milestones, but by losses: 9 children lost, one after another, generation after generation. It was a sorrow that grew heavier with each passing year, an inherited burden that the family carried silently. The longer it went on, the more it seemed like the curse was an unavoidable destiny, a tragic legacy passed down like an heirloom nobody wanted. As the decades wore on, the town's attitude toward the Hollis family shifted from sympathy to fear and then to resignation. The disappearances became part of the local law, a dark secret everyone knew but few dared to confront openly. New families moved into town, heard the stories, and decided to keep their distance. The Hollis family was watched, whispered about, and ultimately isolated, trapped in a cycle that no one dared to break. Time only magnified their isolation, As each new disappearance was a painful reminder that the past was not past at all, it was a living nightmare that continued to unfold. This long history also meant that the disappearances had outlasted any modern investigations or attempts to find answers. Law enforcement changed, new technologies arrived, but nothing altered the pattern. The past haunted the present, casting a long shadow that grew darker with every vanished child. The decades stretched like a timeline of grief, mystery, and unanswered questions, with no end in sight. It was a chilling testament to something far beyond ordinary tragedy, something deeply rooted in the family's existence, etched into the very fabric of their lives, waiting silently for its next victim. The disappearances of the Hollis children unfolded with an eerie consistency that terrified everyone who knew the family. The children were always last seen playing in or around the family home or the nearby woods, places that should have been safe and familiar. The surroundings were no strangers to the family. The estate and its grounds had been passed down through generations, a place where children should have grown up exploring freely. Yet, these same places became the final scenes of their vanishings, as if the land itself held a secret too dark to be uncovered. Neighbors recalled seeing the children laughing in the yard one moment and then suddenly never again. It was as if the familiar spaces twisted into traps, hiding horrors beneath their peaceful appearances. The woods behind the Hollis estate were dense and shadowy, a place local children were warned to avoid after dusk. Tales circulated about strange lights flickering among the trees or faint, haunting voices that seemed to drift on the wind when no one was around. These stories became intertwined with the family's tragedies, feeding the growing sense that something unnatural lingered just beyond the edge of the clearing. The land, which should have been a playground, felt more like a boundary between reality and something darker. For the Hollis children, these spaces were both home and prison, familiar enough to be trusted, but sinister enough to swallow them whole without a trace. Even more unsettling was the fact that the disappearances always occurred close to home, within what should have been a secure environment. There were no signs that the children had wandered far or been taken by strangers from outside the town. It was as though whatever took them was already inside the family's world, hidden in plain sight. The proximity of their last known locations made the lack of evidence even more confounding. If the children vanished from these familiar places, then where had they gone? What force could operate so close without leaving a clue? The question haunted investigators and family members alike, deepening the sense of paranoia and helplessness. The fact that these places were constant in every disappearance turned them into symbols of fear. The house, the yard, and the woods weren't just settings, they became characters in the story, silent witnesses to the unfolding horror. They seemed to hold the answers, but only in fragments and shadows, never fully revealing the truth. This closeness to home, where safety should have been assured, twisted the disappearances into something far more chilling. It wasn't just about the children being taken, it was about the betrayal of the spaces meant to protect them, making every step near those familiar grounds a reminder of what had been lost and what might still be lurking unseen. The eerie silence that followed each disappearance in the Hollis family was one of the most haunting aspects of the tragedy. After a child vanished, the household fell into a strange and unsettling quiet, as if the very walls absorbed the grief and fear without a single sound escaping. No screams, no frantic calls for help, no frantic searching by family members in public view. Instead, there was a chilling calm, a tight-lipped sorrow that seemed almost rehearsed. The Hollis family mourned in private, their grief locked behind closed doors, creating an atmosphere of cold restraint that unsettled neighbors and fueled rumors. This silence wasn't just about mourning, it was a barrier that kept outsiders at bay, a way to contain the horror and keep it from spilling into the world beyond the estate. Neighbors often spoke of seeing the family members moving quietly through the house, their faces drawn and pale, their eyes distant. Yet no one ever saw loud displays of emotion or desperate pleas for help that might have broken the pattern of disappearances. The family's stoicism only deepened the mystery. Why such silence in the face of such unimaginable loss? Some whispered that the family had accepted their fate, that the disappearances were so ingrained in their lives that grief had been replaced by numbness. Others speculated darker possibilities, that the silence was a kind of protection, an attempt to hide truths too terrible to share. Whatever the reason, the quiet was deafening, and it cast a shadow over the town, a reminder of the horrors that were kept hidden behind the Hollis estate's walls. This silence also had the effect of isolating the family even more. Without open displays of grief or calls for justice, the community was left in the dark, unable to connect or help. The absence of shared mourning created a barrier that kept people at a distance, deepening the Hollis family's loneliness and alienation. The silence fed speculation and fear, making the family seem more like ghosts than neighbors. It was a silence that screamed louder than any cry, a vacuum where hope should have been but wasn't. The town's attempts to reach out were met with a quiet that spoke of resignation and secrets too heavy to bear. In the end, the hush that followed each disappearance became as much a part of the family's story as the vanishings themselves. It was a silence that held its own dark power, one that protected, concealed, and perhaps even perpetuated the cycle of loss. This quiet aftermath left everyone wondering what lay beneath, what truths remained buried in the stillness, and whether the silence itself was a warning not to look too closely. The Hollis family was wealthy, influential, and well known in their community, yet their affluence did nothing to shield them from the devastating disappearances that plagued their lineage. In fact, their social status seemed to amplify the mystery and horror surrounding the vanishings. Unlike many cases where poverty or neglect might explain tragedy, the Hollis children came from a family with ample resources, access to the best healthcare, and a comfortable life in a secure estate. The community expected that such privileges would protect the children, but the opposite seemed true. Their wealth only made their disappearances more baffling and unsettling. It was as if no amount of money or power could touch the dark force that haunted their bloodline. The Hollis family's wealth also influenced how the disappearances were handled publicly. There was a tendency, both within the family and the wider community, to keep matters discreet, avoiding scandal or unwanted attention. The family had the means to hire private investigators, legal counsel, and experts, yet none of these efforts yielded answers. Their resources ensured privacy, but privacy bred rumors and suspicion rather than clarity. The community respected the family's status, but behind closed doors, there was an undercurrent of fear and unease. People wondered if the Hollis wealth was a double-edged sword, a blessing in comfort but a curse in secrecy. Moreover, the wealth created a paradoxical isolation for the Hollis family. They lived among the townspeople but remained distant, both physically in their grand estate and socially in the whispers and rumors that circulated about them. The family's affluence separated them from neighbors, making their pain seem remote, their tragedies something to observe from afar rather than understand intimately. This isolation made the disappearances even harder to unravel, as fewer people had close access to the family's daily life or the internal dynamics that might hold clues. Wealth built walls, both literal and figurative, that kept the truth locked away. Despite the privilege and the attempts to use their resources to find answers, the Hollis family remained powerless against the disappearances. Their money could not protect their children or break the pattern that had claimed 9 young lives before age 10. This contradiction deepened the horror and the mystery, as it suggested that the force behind the vanishings was beyond the reach of wealth or influence. It was a stark reminder that some darkness cannot be bought away, that no matter how high the walls or deep the pockets, some tragedies lie outside human control, waiting silently to claim their next victim. The Hollis family's reputation in the community was both a shield and a burden, shaping how their tragic history was perceived and handled. Being a prominent family meant that their every move was watched, whispered about, and scrutinized by neighbors and townsfolk alike. This visibility created a complex dynamic. On one hand, it ensured that the disappearances could not be easily ignored or dismissed. On the other hand, it fostered an atmosphere where secrets were tightly guarded to protect the family's name. The Hollis legacy was a double-edged sword, where pride in their standing coexisted uneasily with a deep fear of scandal and exposure. This tension colored every aspect of their lives and added another layer to the mystery that surrounded the children's vanishings. Community members often found themselves caught between sympathy and suspicion. Many wanted to support the family, understanding that losing children in such a manner was a heartbreak beyond measure. Yet, the repeated nature of the disappearances, combined with the family's sometimes cold and distant demeanor, fueled rumors and mistrust. Gossip spread about hidden family secrets, whispered warnings about curses or darker forces at play, and speculation about what might be kept behind the estate's walls. The Hollis family became, in a sense, both victims and enigmas, viewed with a mixture of pity and fear. This duality complicated relationships within the town and left the family increasingly isolated, despite their public prominence. The pressure to maintain their reputation also meant that the family was reluctant to share details or seek help openly. They wanted to protect their social standing and avoid being labeled as cursed or cursed. This reluctance may have slowed investigations or prevented outside assistance that could have uncovered critical clues. The community's fascination with the family's tragedy sometimes crossed the line into invasive curiosity, but the family's guarded responses only deepened the divide. Their reputation became a barrier to openness, forcing grief and fear to be hidden behind carefully crafted appearances. This isolation fed the ongoing cycle of mystery and loss. As the disappearances continued, the Hollis name became synonymous not with success or influence, but with tragedy and unanswered questions. Their reputation, once a source of pride, turned into a haunting legacy that followed each generation. The community's perception of the family shifted, blending admiration with unease, and leaving the Hollis family trapped in a narrative they could neither escape nor fully control. This complex reputation shaped how the disappearances were understood and remembered, ensuring that the shadow over the family would linger long after the children were gone. The Hollis family's history was riddled with whispers of a dark curse, a sinister force believed by some to be responsible for the disappearances that plagued each generation. This curse wasn't just a rumor, it had become an almost accepted truth among the locals, passed down like a grim legend from one community member to another. The idea of a family curse lent a chilling, almost supernatural weight to the tragedy, transforming it from a series of unfortunate events into something far more malevolent and inevitable. The notion that some unseen, ancient force targeted the Hollis children made the disappearances all the more terrifying and inescapable, as if fate itself had marked them for doom. For many in the town, the curse explained what no investigation or theory could: why every child vanished before their 10th birthday without a trace. In a community steeped in folklore and old beliefs, curses were more than superstition, they were warnings, lessons from the past, and explanations for the inexplicable. The Hollis curse was said to be tied to a long-forgotten sin or betrayal, a dark event buried deep in the family's ancestry. Some whispered of a pact made generations ago, while others believed it was punishment for a crime no one dared to name. These stories fed the fear that the family was doomed to repeat this pattern of loss endlessly, unable to break free from the shadow hanging over them. The belief in the curse also shaped how the family and the community coped with the disappearances. Some family members held on to faith, hoping that understanding the curse might bring a way to break it. Others recoiled in despair, convinced that no amount of effort or love could save their children. The community, meanwhile, oscillated between sympathy and avoidance, treating the Hollis estate as a place touched by darkness, something to be feared or pitied but never fully confronted. The curse became a lens through which all the family's tragedies were viewed, coloring every new disappearance with a sense of fatalism. This notion of a curse also made it difficult for rational explanations to take hold. Theories of abduction, illness, or accident struggled to compete against the weight of something supernatural. It created an almost mystical barrier to understanding, where facts and evidence were overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of doom. The curse cast a long shadow not only over the family's past but over their present and future, making it feel as though the vanishings were part of a story already written, one no one could change or escape. The disappearances of the Hollis children were not random acts of fate. They followed a disturbing pattern that suggested something far more deliberate and sinister at work. Each child vanished before reaching the age of 10, always under eerily similar circumstances, last seen near the family estate or the surrounding woods, with no signs of struggle or forced entry. This repetition created a chilling rhythm, as if some unseen force or entity was systematically targeting the family's youngest members. The pattern was too precise to be mere coincidence, and it quickly became clear that whatever was behind the vanishings was not only methodical but relentless. This unsettling regularity raised countless questions about the nature of the disappearances. Why only children under 10? Why always from the same place? And how could no trace ever be found? The pattern defied all conventional explanations and confounded investigators who tried to piece together the mystery. It suggested a sinister intelligence, something calculated and patient, waiting for the right moment to strike again. This chilling predictability made each disappearance feel inevitable, as if the family was trapped in a cycle they could neither understand nor escape. For the Hollis family, the pattern became a source of dread that overshadowed every joyful moment. Birthdays, milestones, and celebrations were tainted by the looming fear that the next child would soon vanish. This constant anxiety cast a heavy shadow over their lives, making it impossible to fully embrace happiness. The pattern wasn't just a statistic, it was a living nightmare that haunted every corner of their home and every whisper of their past. Each new disappearance reinforced the brutal logic of the pattern, tightening the grip of fear and despair. The community around the Hollis estate also felt the weight of this pattern. It turned the family into a symbol of tragedy and mystery, and the disappearances into a dark legend that shaped the town's identity. The pattern fueled rumors, suspicions, and supernatural theories, as people struggled to make sense of something so horrifying and precise. It became a puzzle with no solution, a riddle wrapped in fear, and a constant reminder that sometimes, evil doesn't strike randomly, it follows its own cruel design, meticulously, mercilessly, and without fail. The town surrounding the Hollis family estate had its own dark history, a shadowy backdrop that seemed to intertwine with the mysterious disappearances of the children. Long before the first Hollis child vanished, the area was known for eerie legends and unexplained events, whispers of strange happenings that locals dared not speak of aloud. This unsettling past created an atmosphere thick with superstition and unease, a fertile ground where fear and mystery could easily take root. The community's collective memory held stories of ancient rituals, forgotten curses, and unexplained vanishings that predated even the Hollis tragedies, hinting that the land itself might harbor secrets darker than anyone wanted to admit. These regional legends added a layer of complexity to the Hollis family's story. The disappearances didn't exist in isolation, they were part of a larger tapestry woven with fear and the unknown. Locals often speculated that the land on which the Hollis estate stood was cursed or haunted by malevolent forces. Some believed that the soil was tainted by past misdeeds, that the woods concealed portals to other realms, or that restless spirits roamed the area, drawn to the family for reasons no one fully understood. These tales passed from generation to generation, growing more ominous with each retelling, and feeding the growing dread that surrounded the Hollis children's fates. The town's dark history also influenced how the disappearances were perceived and investigated. Officials and investigators, aware of the local superstitions, sometimes approached the cases with a cautious respect for the unseen forces people feared. Their efforts were often hindered by the community's reluctance to share information or get involved, fearing that probing too deeply might awaken something worse. This silence and mistrust made it difficult to gather evidence or unravel the truth, allowing the mystery to fester and grow. The past seemed to cast a long shadow, blurring the line between fact and folklore and making it nearly impossible to separate reality from myth. For the Hollis family, living amidst such a troubled history meant confronting more than just their personal tragedy. They were entwined in a legacy of fear that stretched beyond their own bloodline, connected to a place where darkness had long taken root. The town's haunted past was a constant reminder that the disappearances might be part of something far larger and far older than anyone dared imagine, a chilling reminder that sometimes, history doesn't just repeat itself, it traps those caught in its grip in a cycle of suffering and silence. The disappearances of the Hollis children were shrouded in mystery, and over time, stories began to surface about strange behaviors and unsettling events within the family home before each child vanished. Those closest to the family spoke in hushed tones about unexplained noises echoing through the halls, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, footsteps pacing in empty rooms, and shadows flickering just beyond the edge of vision. These eerie phenomena hinted at something far more sinister than simple disappearances. They suggested an otherworldly presence or a hidden darkness that permeated the very walls of the Hollis estate. Family members recalled moments of inexplicable fear gripping the children in the days leading up to their disappearance. Some would speak of nightmares so vivid and terrifying that they would wake screaming, clutching at invisible threats. Others displayed sudden and unexplainable changes in behavior, withdrawal, agitation, or a strange fixation on certain parts of the house or the surrounding woods. These chilling signs were often dismissed as childhood fears, but in hindsight, they painted a disturbing picture of something stalking the family from within. The household was alive with a tension that no one could fully understand or explain, an atmosphere thick with dread that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Neighbors and relatives also reported unusual occurrences around the estate during these times. Pets would act skittish, refusing to enter certain rooms or areas of the property. Objects appeared moved or misplaced with no logical explanation. Sometimes, strange lights were seen flickering through the windows late at night, and distant, mournful sounds would carry on the wind, impossible to trace to any source. These events were never acknowledged openly by the family, who seemed determined to maintain an appearance of normalcy despite the mounting terror inside their walls. This silence only deepened the mystery, as the unsettling phenomena remained locked behind closed doors, hidden from the outside world. These unexplained occurrences hinted at a presence that was watching, waiting, and perhaps even influencing the fate of the Hollis children. The strange behaviors and eerie signs became a silent prelude to each disappearance, a dark ritual that no one fully understood. It was as if the house itself was alive, a malevolent force that tightened its grip around the family, marking each child before taking them away. This haunting presence blurred the line between reality and nightmare, making the Hollis estate a place where fear was tangible, and the unseen waited patiently in the shadows, ready to claim its next victim. Among the most chilling and heartbreaking aspects of the Hollis family tragedy was the eerie disappearance of each child's belongings along with the children themselves. When a child vanished, it wasn't just their presence that was wiped away. Their toys, clothes, personal treasures, everything they owned would inexplicably vanish as well. This strange phenomenon baffled investigators and deepened the sense of unreality surrounding the disappearances. It was as if not only the children but every trace of their existence was being erased, leaving behind an unsettling void that defied logic and explanation. The loss of the children's belongings made the disappearances feel even more complete and final. Usually, when someone goes missing, their personal items remain behind, clues that could lead to answers or offer hope. But with the Hollis children, The sudden disappearance of everything tied to them suggested something far more deliberate and unnatural at play. It was as though an invisible hand reached into their lives and wiped out every sign of their being, leaving no way to track or remember them. This total erasure stripped away any chance of closure, compounding the family's grief and the community's bewilderment. Family members often described the empty spaces where the children's things once were with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. Bedrooms that should have been filled with laughter and childhood memories stood cold and bare. Beloved toys that had been treasured for years vanished without a trace. The hollowness left behind was a constant reminder of what was lost, not just lives, but the very essence of those children's existence. It was as if their very souls had been pulled from the world, leaving behind only silence and absence. This obliteration of their belongings felt like a cruel punishment, a final act of erasure that denied even the smallest remembrance. Investigators struggled to understand how such disappearances could happen without leaving physical evidence. The missing items complicated searches and delayed breakthroughs, as the usual signs that help track missing persons were simply not there. The total disappearance of belongings became another layer of the enigma, one that set the Hollis case apart from any typical missing persons investigation. It suggested forces beyond human comprehension, emphasizing that the children's vanishings were not just tragedies but something far more sinister, an unraveling of reality itself, where nothing was left behind to prove that the children had ever existed at all. In the wake of each disappearance, the Hollis family faced an unrelenting wave of suspicion and fear from the community around them. Though the family was respected and even admired for their wealth and status, the repeated tragedies cast a dark cloud over their name, leading neighbors and townsfolk to question what might be hidden beneath the polished surface. Whispers began to circulate, quiet but persistent doubts about whether the family was truly innocent or if some secret, buried deep within their history, was responsible for the horrors that unfolded. This suspicion was a heavy burden, isolating the family even further and complicating an already unbearable grief. The town's growing mistrust wasn't entirely unfounded, at least in the eyes of some. The lack of clear answers, the pattern of disappearances, and the family's often reserved or defensive responses to inquiries fueled the fire of doubt. Some community members speculated that the Hollis family might be hiding something sinister, whether through neglect, dark rituals, or even involvement in the children's vanishings. These suspicions created a toxic environment where neighbors kept their distance, eyes filled with both pity and accusation. The family's social standing did little to protect them from these whispered judgments. In some ways, it made them an even bigger target for rumors and fear. This atmosphere of suspicion seeped into every interaction, affecting not only the family but the entire community. Friends grew wary, and casual acquaintances turned cold. Invitations were withdrawn, conversations grew strained, and the Hollis estate became a place to avoid rather than a center of social life. The fear of being associated with the family's curse or tragedy kept people silent, unwilling to ask difficult questions or offer support openly. This social alienation only deepened the family's sense of loneliness and despair, leaving them trapped in a circle of grief compounded by judgment. Investigators and law enforcement also faced pressure from the community, balancing the desire to find answers with the growing unease about the family's role in the disappearances. Every lead was scrutinized, every detail questioned, but without concrete evidence, suspicion remained just that, an undercurrent of fear that refused to dissipate. This tension left the Hollis family caught between their own private agony and the public's watchful, doubtful gaze. The suspicion surrounding them became an invisible barrier, one that kept the truth hidden and allowed the mystery to fester, leaving everyone trapped in a web of fear and unanswered questions. The absence of concrete answers in the wake of the Hollis children's disappearances cast a suffocating shadow over the family and the community, fueling endless speculation and fear. Despite countless investigations, searches, and inquiries, no definitive explanation ever emerged to unravel the mystery. No bodies were found, no witnesses came forward with reliable information, and no logical motives presented themselves. This void of understanding made the disappearances feel like an unsolvable puzzle, a nightmare without resolution, and it left everyone involved grasping at shadows in desperate attempts to make sense of the unthinkable. The lack of answers was profoundly destabilizing. For the Hollis family, it meant living in a perpetual state of uncertainty and anguish, unable to mourn properly or find closure. Each child's disappearance became a fresh wound, reopened again and again by the absence of any finality. The uncertainty gnawed at their sanity and their hope, leaving them trapped in a cycle of grief and unanswered questions. For the community, it bred fear and mistrust, as people wondered if the disappearances might continue or if some hidden danger lurked nearby. The unknown became a presence in its own right, an invisible threat that could strike again at any time. This enduring mystery also gave rise to a multitude of theories and rumors. Some believed in supernatural causes, curses, spirits, or malevolent entities targeting the family. Others suspected human perpetrators, secret enemies, hidden family secrets, or dark rituals gone awry. Still, others proposed tragic accidents or mental illness, though none of these theories ever fit perfectly with the facts or lack thereof. The absence of clear answers created fertile ground for wild speculation, each new idea gaining traction in the absence of anything more concrete. This chaos of theories only deepened the confusion, making it even harder to discern truth from fiction. Law enforcement and investigators were often frustrated by the dead ends and lack of cooperation from the family, who were understandably protective and grief-stricken. With no physical evidence to follow, the trail went cold repeatedly, and hopes for resolution dwindled with each passing year. The silence of the vanished children was echoed by the silence of the clues, reinforcing the sense that the disappearances were part of a story that no one could rewrite. The absence of answers left a void filled with fear, sorrow, and a haunting question that lingered. Why did every Hollis child vanish before age 10, and who or what was responsible? The Hollis family's story was marked not only by the heartbreaking disappearances of their children but also by the profound psychological and emotional toll it exacted on those left behind. Each vanishing carved deep wounds in the hearts of parents, siblings, and relatives, leaving behind a void filled with grief, confusion, and a haunting sense of helplessness. The pain was unlike any ordinary loss. It was compounded by the baffling nature of the disappearances, the lack of closure, and the growing fear that no child in the family was ever truly safe. This emotional trauma shaped the family's daily existence, coloring their relationships, their mental health, and their very sense of reality. The surviving family members often described living with a constant, gnawing anxiety that each new child born could be the next to vanish. This looming dread overshadowed moments of joy and celebration, casting a pall over family gatherings and milestones. Parents struggled with guilt and self-blame, questioning if there was something they could have done differently to protect their children. Siblings grappled with survivors' guilt, haunted by the absence of their brothers and sisters and the mystery that surrounded their fate. The emotional scars left invisible wounds, as deeply felt as any physical harm, eroding the family's cohesion and sense of security. Beyond the family, the psychological impact rippled through the community. Neighbors and townspeople, witnessing the repeated tragedies, developed a shared sense of helplessness and fear. The Hollis disappearances became a dark shadow over the town's collective consciousness, reminding everyone that even the safest places could harbor unspeakable horrors. The story fostered an atmosphere of caution and superstition, as residents became wary of the unknown forces that might still be at work. The emotional weight of the disappearances extended beyond grief, shaping the community's identity and influencing how people related to each other and to the Hollis family. Psychologists and experts who studied the case noted the devastating impact on mental health that such repeated trauma could cause. The family's story became a grim example of how unresolved loss and fear could consume lives, trapping individuals in cycles of despair and paranoia. Therapy and counseling were often sought, but the unique nature of the disappearances made healing difficult. The emotional devastation lingered like a storm cloud, persistent and unyielding, reminding everyone that the true horror of the Hollis family tragedy was not just the disappearances themselves but the lasting damage they inflicted on all who survived. The Hollis family's struggle was not only defined by the disappearances themselves but also by the desperate attempts to fight back against the invisible force that seemed to claim each child. Despite overwhelming fear and grief, there was a fierce determination within the family to protect their remaining children and break the cycle that had haunted them for generations. This resolve sparked a series of actions, both conventional and extraordinary, that showcased their unyielding hope and refusal to accept the mysterious losses as inevitable. The family's efforts began with practical measures, such as heightened security around the estate and constant vigilance over the children's whereabouts. Parents and relatives took turns watching over the young ones, creating barriers against the unknown threat that had stolen so much from them. Locks were changed, gates were reinforced, and no child was allowed out of sight without supervision. These actions, though born of fear, reflected a fierce love and a desperate hope to keep the next generation safe. The family clung to these precautions as lifelines in a sea of uncertainty. Beyond physical safeguards, the family also turned to more unconventional methods. In an effort to understand or counteract the dark force believed to be responsible, they sought out spiritual guidance, rituals, and protective charms. Elders consulted with mystics and historians, hoping to uncover the origins of the curse or uncover a way to break it. These attempts were a testament to the depth of their desperation and their willingness to explore any avenue that might offer salvation. The blending of faith, folklore, and fear created a complex tapestry of hope, anxiety, and superstition. Despite these efforts, the sense of helplessness never fully lifted. Each new disappearance felt like a failure, a cruel reminder that the family's defenses, no matter how carefully constructed, were not enough. Yet even in the face of such devastating loss, the family's persistence spoke volumes about the human spirit's refusal to surrender to darkness. Their fight was not just for survival but for reclaiming control over a fate that seemed written in shadow. This relentless battle against the unknown became a defining feature of their story, illustrating both the tragic cost and the enduring hope that kept them moving forward against impossible odds. Amid the relentless tragedies that befell the Hollis family, there emerged one extraordinary thread of hope and resilience, the survival of a single child who defied the haunting pattern that had claimed every other sibling before reaching the age of 10. This child, unlike the others, remained present, growing up under the same ominous shadow that had swallowed the rest, carrying with them the weight of both grief and expectation. Their survival was not just a miracle, it was a silent rebellion against the darkness that had seemed destined to claim them all, and it raised profound questions about why they were spared when none of the others were. This child's existence became a beacon of both hope and mystery within the family and the community. To many, their survival was a sign that the curse or force haunting the Hollis bloodline was not absolute, that perhaps it could be broken, that there was a way out of the cycle of loss. Yet, with that hope came immense pressure. This survivor was not just living their own life, they were carrying the legacy of the vanished siblings, the unspoken stories of those who had disappeared, and the desperate yearning of a family desperate for answers. Their survival was a rare gift, but also a heavy burden. Growing up, this child experienced the world through a lens colored by fear, suspicion, and sorrow. They knew from a young age that they were different, that they had escaped a fate that seemed inevitable. This knowledge shaped their identity and perspective, pushing them toward questions no other child in the family could ask without fear. Why had they been spared? What was different about them? Were they truly safe, or was their survival only temporary? These questions haunted their thoughts, driving a search for truth that intertwined with their own struggle to survive emotionally and psychologically. The survivor's story became a crucial piece of the Hollis family's puzzle. Their experiences, memories, and insights offered rare glimpses into a family world marked by loss but also by love, resilience, and the will to endure. They embodied the hope that the cycle of tragedy could be broken, that light could emerge from the shadows. Yet, their survival also deepened the mystery. If the force behind the disappearances had spared one, what did that mean for the family's past, present, and future? The presence of this lone child was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest stories, there can be an unexpected thread of light. The survival of the one Hollis child who escaped the fate that claimed all others was not just a matter of luck or chance. It was deeply intertwined with the complex and often painful relationships within the family. Unlike the vanished children, this survivor grew up navigating a household weighed down by grief, suspicion, and unspoken fears, where every interaction carried the echoes of loss. The family dynamic was forever altered by the disappearances, and the survivor's presence became both a source of hope and a reminder of the fractures beneath the surface. Within the family, relationships were strained and complicated by the shadow of the disappearances. Parents, devastated by the loss of their children, oscillated between overwhelming sorrow and fierce protectiveness over the survivor. Their love was often tinged with anxiety and guilt, wondering if they were doing enough to shield this child or if they might lose them too. Siblings who survived alongside the one child bore their own burdens of loss, sometimes withdrawing into silence or struggling to reconcile their own grief with the need to support the survivor. This created an emotional atmosphere charged with tension and fragility, where every moment was colored by the past. The survivor themselves was caught in the middle of these fractured relationships, grappling with feelings of isolation and responsibility. They were expected to carry the weight of the family's history while forging their own path, a daunting task under the best of circumstances, but nearly impossible given the trauma surrounding them. The survivor's relationship with their parents and remaining siblings was complex, filled with moments of tenderness and connection, but also marked by misunderstandings and emotional distance. The family's grief sometimes created barriers to open communication, making it difficult for the survivor to express their own fears and hopes. Beyond the immediate family, the survivor's relationships with the outside world were also shaped by their unique experience. Friends, neighbors, and the wider community often viewed them through the lens of the family's dark legacy, imposing expectations or assumptions that were difficult to escape. The survivor faced the challenge of carving out an identity separate from the tragedy that defined their family, a struggle that often felt isolating and overwhelming. Despite these challenges, the survivor's resilience and capacity for connection offered a glimpse of healing and hope, suggesting that even in the most fractured families, bonds could endure and perhaps even grow stronger in the face of unimaginable pain. The weight of the Hollis family's dark legacy fell heavily on the shoulders of the surviving child, whose life became an intricate dance between remembrance and the desperate need to move forward. This child grew up constantly haunted by the shadows of their missing siblings, their stories whispered in hushed tones and etched into the very fabric of the family's history. The surviving child bore the invisible burden of carrying their memories, feeling an intense responsibility to honor those who were lost while grappling with the fear that the same fate could one day befall them. This duality shaped their every thought, action, and relationship, creating a complex emotional landscape marked by sorrow, resilience, and a relentless search for meaning. From a young age, the survivor was acutely aware of the silence that surrounded their vanished siblings, how their rooms remained untouched, their belongings carefully preserved, and their absence felt like an open wound that never healed. This lingering presence was a constant reminder of what had been lost and what could still be lost. The survivor often found themselves torn between the desire to remember and the need to protect their own fragile sense of self from being overwhelmed by grief. They carried these memories privately, sometimes sharing them cautiously with those they trusted, but often retreating into solitude as they tried to make sense of the incomprehensible. This burden was compounded by the family's collective trauma, which shaped the survivor's understanding of identity and belonging. The family's history was steeped in fear and unanswered questions, and the survivor often struggled to separate their own experiences from the legacy of loss. They were expected to be strong, to carry the family's hope for the future, but also to respect the past that was filled with pain and silence. This balancing act was exhausting, and it forced the survivor into a unique position, both guardian of memory and beacon of survival. As the survivor grew older, this internal struggle deepened. They wrestled with feelings of guilt, wondering why they had been spared when others were not, and questioned the meaning behind their survival. At the same time, they sought ways to reclaim their life, to break free from the haunting cycle that had defined their family for so long. Their journey was one of both confrontation and healing, facing the shadows of the past while striving to create a future where the tragedies of the Hollis family no longer dictated their identity or destiny. This struggle embodied the profound complexity of surviving not just loss, but a legacy steeped in mystery and pain. The Hollis family's dark history was not only marked by tragedy but also by a relentless quest for answers, driven by the surviving child's determination to uncover the truth behind the disappearances that had shattered their family. This quest became a defining mission, a personal journey fueled by both grief and a fierce need for closure. Unlike those before them, who vanished into the shadows without explanation, the survivor took on the role of investigator, piecing together fragments of memories, family stories, and obscure clues that might finally reveal what had happened to the missing children. This pursuit of truth was as much about healing as it was about uncovering the past. From an early age, the survivor sensed that beneath the surface of the family's polished exterior lay secrets waiting to be uncovered. Conversations that were once taboo slowly began to unravel as they pressed relatives for answers, challenged family narratives, and sought out any information that might shed light on the mysterious vanishings. The survivor's persistence created tension within the family. Some wanted to protect old wounds, fearing that digging too deep would only reopen pain, while others secretly hoped for resolution. This internal conflict underscored the survivor's journey, balancing the need for truth with the delicate emotional landscape of a grieving family. The survivor's investigation extended beyond the family, reaching into local history, folklore, and even obscure records that hinted at curses, hidden dangers, or long-forgotten tragedies linked to the Hollis estate. Each discovery added pieces to a puzzle that was far more complex and terrifying than anyone had imagined. They encountered dead ends, strange coincidences, and disturbing patterns that suggested the disappearances were not isolated incidents but part of a larger, darker narrative. This growing awareness heightened the survivor's resolve but also deepened the emotional toll, as each revelation brought them closer to a truth that was both unsettling and difficult to accept. Throughout this process, the survivor grappled with the dual challenge of uncovering painful truths while protecting themselves from becoming consumed by the darkness that had enveloped their family. The search for answers was a lonely and often frightening path, but it also offered a glimmer of hope, the possibility that understanding the past could break the cycle, that knowledge could bring freedom where fear had ruled for so long. This journey of discovery was not just about the vanished children but about reclaiming a future that had been stolen by mystery and loss. The survivors' relentless search for answers into the Hollis family's dark legacy led them into uncharted and often unsettling territory, revealing secrets that many wished had remained buried. As they peeled back the layers of their family's history, they discovered a web of hidden truths, stories whispered in fear, fragments of forgotten events, and long-buried fears that pointed to something far more sinister than mere coincidence. This journey exposed the shadowy undercurrents that had shaped the family's fate, forcing the survivor to confront the uncomfortable reality that the disappearances were entwined with forces and histories beyond simple explanation. Among the revelations were cryptic mentions of past family members who had suffered inexplicable tragedies, strange rituals performed in secrecy, and dark warnings passed down through generations. These pieces of the puzzle hinted at a curse or malevolent influence tied to the Hollis bloodline, suggesting that the vanishings were not random acts of misfortune but part of a pattern that had haunted the family for decades, perhaps even centuries. The survivor learned that their family's story was tangled with local legends and ancient fears, stories that many in the community had deliberately chosen to forget or ignore, but which still lingered beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The survivor's discoveries also revealed the complex ways in which these dark legacies affected not just the family but the entire community. Fear, superstition, and silence had shaped the town's relationship with the Hollis family, creating an environment where truths were obscured and rumors thrived. The community's unwillingness to face these shadows allowed the mystery to fester, leaving the family isolated and vulnerable. The survivor came to understand that their fight was not only against whatever force haunted their bloodline but also against the collective denial and fear that had allowed the darkness to persist unchecked. These revelations were both illuminating and deeply unsettling. They offered clues and context but also raised new questions about the nature of the curse, the role of fate, and the possibility of breaking free from a cycle seemingly destined to repeat itself. The survivor was forced to confront the reality that the truth was more complicated and more terrifying than they had imagined, involving forces beyond human control or understanding. Yet, despite the weight of these dark discoveries, the survivor's determination to uncover and face these hidden truths became a source of strength, fueling their ongoing quest to protect the future and honor the past. As the survivor delved deeper into the family's dark past and the mysterious circumstances surrounding the disappearances, they began to realize that the answers they sought were not just hidden in history or superstition, but also in the very fabric of their own identity. The survivor's unique position, as the only child to escape the fate that befell their siblings, became a critical key to understanding the puzzle. It was no longer simply a matter of uncovering external truths. It was about confronting the inner truths of what it meant to be a Hollis child, how the legacy shaped them, and what role they might play in breaking the cycle. This revelation brought with it a profound sense of isolation. The survivor felt separated from others by the weight of their family's curse, a burden that few could truly comprehend. Their survival was both a blessing and a curse, setting them apart not only from their vanished siblings but from the outside world as well. They grappled with feelings of loneliness, survivor's guilt, and the pressure to live up to expectations they had never asked for. This internal struggle became a defining part of their journey, as they sought to reconcile the shadows of their past with the possibility of a future free from the haunting pattern. Understanding that the family's tragedy was woven into their own identity forced the survivor to question everything they thought they knew about themselves. They began to explore their own nature, whether there was something inherently different about them that allowed survival, or whether they had a role to play in protecting the family from further harm. This self-exploration was both terrifying and necessary, pushing the survivor to confront fears, doubts, and the possibility that their life was entwined with forces far beyond ordinary comprehension. It was a journey inward as much as outward, a search for meaning in the face of inexplicable loss. The survivor's realization that the legacy was part of their identity also brought a renewed sense of purpose. No longer just a victim of circumstance, they began to see themselves as a guardian of the family's history and future, someone who could carry the weight of the past while forging a new path forward. This understanding, though fraught with emotional complexity, became a source of strength. It marked a turning point where survival shifted from mere existence to active resistance against the darkness that had long haunted the Hollis name, a step toward reclaiming control and rewriting the family's story. As the survivor continued their journey through the tangled web of the Hollis family's dark history, they uncovered a profound truth that shook the very foundation of their understanding. The disappearances were not merely isolated tragedies but part of a broader, sinister cycle that had repeated across generations. This pattern was woven into the family's bloodline, a relentless force that seemed to choose its victims with terrifying precision and cruelty. The survivor realized that breaking free from this cycle would require more than uncovering secrets or confronting external threats. It demanded confronting the very nature of the curse that had gripped their family for so long. This cyclical nature suggested that the Hollis children's vanishings were part of an ancient pattern, echoing through time like a haunting refrain. It was as if some dark force had bound itself to the family, marking each generation with the same devastating fate. The survivor saw evidence in old diaries, whispered legends, and cryptic records that spoke of ancestors lost under mysterious circumstances, of strange rituals meant to contain or appease the force, and of warnings passed down from one generation to the next. This unbroken chain of sorrow painted a chilling picture of inevitability, one that the family had struggled to escape but never fully understood. Recognizing the cyclical nature of the tragedy brought a new urgency to the survivor's quest. It became clear that unless something fundamental changed, the pattern would continue to repeat itself, endangering not just the immediate family but future generations as well. The survivor grappled with the weight of this realization, feeling the crushing responsibility of being the one who might finally break the cycle. This knowledge was both a heavy burden and a beacon of hope, suggesting that while the past was filled with darkness, the future could be different if they found a way to intervene. The survivor also began to understand that breaking the cycle would require more than confronting physical dangers or uncovering family secrets. It would involve confronting deeply entrenched fears, confronting the source of the curse itself, and perhaps making sacrifices that transcended ordinary understanding. It was a path fraught with uncertainty and peril, but it was the only way to protect what remained of the family and reclaim their legacy from the shadows. This realization transformed the survivor's journey into a battle not just for survival, but for liberation from a fate that had haunted their family for generations. The survivor's journey into the depths of the Hollis family's tragic legacy eventually revealed the profound impact that the disappearances and the lurking darkness had on their sense of self and future. Living as the sole child who escaped the curse's grasp, they were forced to confront an overwhelming internal conflict: how to live a life burdened by the ghosts of the past while forging a future that was truly their own. This duality shaped their every decision, relationship, and moment of self-reflection, revealing the complex struggle between survival and identity that defined their existence. The survivor was caught in a liminal space between mourning and hope. On one hand, they carried the collective grief of the family, feeling the weight of every lost sibling and the unanswered questions that hovered like shadows. This grief was deeply personal yet also communal, as the survivor became the living embodiment of all that the family had lost. On the other hand, they also carried the spark of possibility, the chance to break free from the cycle, to redefine what it meant to be a Hollis child, and to live beyond the suffocating grip of fear and silence. Navigating this space was emotionally exhausting and fraught with uncertainty. This internal struggle influenced the survivors' relationships and worldview. They often felt isolated, unable to fully share their experience with those outside the family or even with some within it. The burden of being the last surviving child created an invisible barrier, separating them from peers who could not understand the weight they carried. At the same time, the survivor found themselves drawn to uncovering truths, advocating for change, and seeking connections that could provide support and understanding. These efforts were both acts of resistance and healing, attempts to reclaim agency over a life shadowed by loss. The survivors' contemplation of their future was shaped by this tension between past and possibility. They grappled with questions of legacy, wondering how to honor the memory of those who vanished while also building a life that was not defined solely by tragedy. This meant confronting fears, embracing resilience, and cultivating hope even when the shadows loomed large. Their journey was one of transformation, moving from victimhood toward empowerment, from silence toward voice, and from despair toward a fragile but growing sense of peace. It was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, even when tested by the darkest of circumstances. The survivors' journey was marked not only by the weight of their family's tragic past but also by the profound loneliness that accompanied being the sole living child among vanished siblings. This loneliness was not simply the absence of others, it was a deep, pervasive feeling of isolation that set them apart from both family and the wider world. They carried the invisible scars of loss and survival, bearing memories and fears that few could understand or share. This solitude shaped their emotional landscape in ways both subtle and profound, coloring their sense of self and their interactions with others. From an early age, the survivor felt the sharp contrast between their existence and the absence of those who should have been by their side, siblings who never returned, whose presence was felt only in photographs, whispered stories, and the hollow spaces they left behind. This absence was a constant companion, a silent reminder of the fragility of life and the randomness of fate. The survivor grappled with feelings of abandonment and survivor's guilt, wondering why they were spared when others were taken. These emotions created a chasm between them and others, making it difficult to form connections that felt fully authentic or unburdened by grief. The survivor's loneliness was compounded by the family's protective walls and unspoken fears. The adults around them, haunted by loss and suspicion, often shielded the survivor from certain truths, inadvertently creating emotional barriers. Conversations about the past were hushed or avoided altogether, and the survivor learned to navigate a world where silence often spoke louder than words. This environment fostered a sense of solitude that was not just physical but deeply emotional, a feeling of being alone even when surrounded by those who loved them. Yet, within this loneliness, the survivor also found moments of quiet strength and reflection. The solitude became a space for introspection, a place to confront fears and search for meaning beyond the family's tragedy. It allowed them to develop resilience, to build an inner world rich with hope and determination. This solitude was a double-edged sword, both a source of pain and a crucible for growth. The survivor's ability to endure this profound loneliness while continuing their quest for truth and survival speaks to an extraordinary depth of character, one forged in the fires of loss but tempered by an unyielding will to live and understand. The survivor's experience of navigating life after witnessing the vanishing of every Hollis family child except themselves was deeply shaped by a constant undercurrent of fear not just of the unknown, but of the very possibility that they too could disappear without warning. This fear was an ever-present shadow, influencing their choices, relationships, and sense of security from a very young age. Unlike other children who live carefree lives, the survivor grew up acutely aware of the fragility of their own existence, haunted by the fate that had befallen their siblings. This pervasive anxiety became a defining feature of their reality, a silent terror lurking just beneath the surface of everyday life. This fear was not abstract or distant, it was tangible and immediate. Every strange noise in the night, every unexplained absence or sudden change in the household, was a potential sign of impending loss. The survivor learned to be hypervigilant, constantly scanning their environment for threats, both real and imagined. This heightened state of alertness was exhausting but necessary, a defense mechanism honed through trauma. It shaped how they interacted with the world, often making them cautious, withdrawn, or distrustful of those around them. Trust was difficult to give, and safety was something they felt they had to claim moment by moment. At the same time, this fear was deeply isolating. The survivors' constant anxiety was something they struggled to articulate, as few could truly understand the depth of their dread. They often bore this burden alone, internalizing the terror while trying to maintain a facade of normalcy. This internalization created a cycle where fear bred silence, and silence bred more fear. The survivors' fear was not just about themselves but about the family's legacy, the history of disappearances that loomed over them like a curse. They feared what the future might hold, uncertain whether their survival was a temporary reprieve or a sign of something greater. Yet, within this fear, there was also a quiet resilience. The survivor's ability to live with such profound anxiety without succumbing to despair is a testament to their strength. They learned to coexist with fear, using it as a motivator rather than a prison. This delicate balance allowed them to push forward to seek answers, to connect with others, and to fight against the darkness that had defined their family's history. Their story is one of courage born from fear, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming terror, the human spirit can endure and strive toward hope. The survivor's life was profoundly shaped by the weight of countless unanswered questions that hung over the Hollis family like a suffocating fog. Each disappearance left behind more mysteries than answers, and these gaps in knowledge became an ever-present source of frustration, confusion, and torment. The survivor was caught in a relentless quest to fill these voids, driven by the desperate hope that uncovering the truth might bring peace to a family fractured by loss and silence. This pursuit was complicated by the fact that many truths seemed deliberately obscured, buried beneath layers of denial, fear, and secrecy. From early on, the survivor sensed the deep fractures within the family narrative. Conversations about the vanished children were often avoided or ended abruptly, as if speaking aloud might summon the darkness again. Relatives held back details, whispered warnings, or outright lied to protect themselves and others from pain. This patchwork of fragmented stories and conflicting accounts made it difficult for the survivor to piece together a coherent picture of what had truly happened. The more they searched, the more elusive the truth became, and the gaps in understanding grew wider, deepening the survivor's sense of isolation and desperation. These unanswered questions were not only about the disappearances themselves but extended to the family's history, the nature of the curse or force at play, and the role each member might have had in the unfolding tragedy. The survivor struggled to reconcile the known facts with the inexplicable elements, ancient symbols, strange behaviors, and ominous warnings that seemed to suggest something beyond ordinary comprehension. This uncertainty fueled a restless mind, unable to settle for easy answers or explanations that didn't fully account for the horror they had witnessed. The survivor's quest was also marked by an intense internal conflict between the need to know and the fear of what that knowledge might bring. Each new piece of information held the potential to illuminate but also to unravel, threatening to deepen the wounds rather than heal them. This tension created a delicate balance between hope and dread, driving the survivor onward while also weighing heavily on their emotional and psychological well-being. The unanswered questions were a double-edged sword, both the motivation for survival and the source of ongoing torment. Despite this, the survivor's determination to seek the truth never wavered. The gaps in knowledge became a challenge to confront rather than a reason to surrender. This relentless pursuit, fueled by love, guilt, and the desire for closure, defined much of their journey and underscored the tragic complexity of living with so many unknowns, where every answer revealed only deeper mysteries, and every silence echoed with haunting questions. The survivor's life was inevitably shaped by a deep and complicated relationship with fear that was both a protector and a prison. This fear was born not only from the knowledge of what had happened to their siblings but also from the constant threat that it could happen again. It lurked in every shadow, whispered in every silence, and colored every decision they made. This omnipresent fear created a tension between survival instincts and the desire to live freely, shaping the survivor's personality, choices, and worldview in profound ways. From a young age, the survivor learned that fear was not something to be dismissed or ignored. It was a vital signal, a warning that danger was never far away. This heightened awareness kept them vigilant and cautious, often forcing them to anticipate threats before they appeared. But this same fear could also be paralyzing, limiting their ability to take risks, trust others, or imagine a future unmarked by the past. It was a double-edged sword, protecting them from immediate harm but also imprisoning them in a cycle of anxiety and uncertainty. The survivors' daily life was a constant negotiation between these conflicting forces. This complex relationship with fear also shaped the survivors' interactions with others. While some might interpret their cautiousness as mistrust or aloofness, it was rooted in a deep need for safety and control in a world that had proven unpredictable and dangerous. The survivor struggled to form connections that felt genuine and secure, often keeping others at arm's length to protect themselves from potential pain or loss. This emotional guardedness was a survival mechanism, honed by years of trauma and loss, but it also contributed to feelings of loneliness and isolation. Yet, despite the overwhelming presence of fear, the survivor demonstrated remarkable resilience. They found ways to channel that fear into determination and courage, transforming what could have been a source of paralysis into a force that propelled them forward. This resilience did not mean the absence of fear but rather the ability to live with it, to acknowledge its presence without allowing it to dictate every aspect of their life. The survivor's journey became one of mastering fear not by conquering it completely but by learning to coexist with it, finding strength in vulnerability and hope amid uncertainty. In this way, fear became both a shadow and a light, shaping the survivor's path and forging a unique strength born from the darkest of circumstances. It was a constant companion, a reminder of what was lost, and a catalyst for the courage needed to face the unknown and seek a future beyond the haunting legacy of the Hollis family. The survivors' understanding of their family's tragedy was deeply influenced by the realization that the disappearances were not random acts of misfortune, but rather the result of a deeply ingrained and sinister force that had gripped the Hollis bloodline for generations. This recognition forced the survivor to reconsider everything they thought they knew about their family, their identity, and the world around them. It wasn't just a story of loss and grief, it was a tale woven with elements of darkness that defied simple explanation, challenging the survivor's perception of reality and their place within it. As the survivor pieced together fragments of the past, they began to see patterns emerging, patterns that suggested a malevolent presence, an unseen force that had marked the family long before their own time. This force seemed to operate beyond the laws of nature and reason, influencing events in ways that were both terrifying and inexplicable. The survivor encountered stories of strange occurrences, unexplainable phenomena, and whispered warnings passed down through generations, all pointing to a curse or entity that demanded sacrifice and secrecy. This revelation added a chilling layer to the family's history, transforming it from a tragic anomaly into a haunting legacy. Coming to terms with this dark reality was a profound and painful process. The survivor had to confront the possibility that their family's suffering was tied to something far greater and more terrifying than mere chance or human cruelty. This meant grappling with fears that extended beyond the physical world into the realm of the supernatural or metaphysical. It challenged their faith, their logic, and their sense of safety, forcing them to question what was possible and what was not. The weight of this knowledge was immense, but it also provided a crucial piece of the puzzle, an explanation that, while frightening, offered a path toward understanding and perhaps even escape. This revelation also deepened the survivors' resolve. Knowing that the disappearances were the work of a dark, persistent force gave them a clearer target for their quest, not just to find their lost siblings or uncover family secrets, but to confront and ultimately overcome the evil that had claimed so many lives. This battle was no longer just personal, it was a fight against an ancient darkness that threatened to consume the entire family line. The survivors' journey took on new urgency and meaning as they prepared to face this force head-on, armed with knowledge, courage, and an unyielding desire to break the cycle and reclaim their family's future. The survivor's life was irrevocably changed by the stark reality that their family's tragic history was not just a series of isolated incidents but part of a vast, hidden web of secrets stretching far beyond their immediate experience. As they dug deeper into the Hollis family's past, it became clear that the disappearances of the children were connected to a legacy of dark, long-buried truths that those who came before had fought desperately to keep hidden. These secrets were layered and complex, interwoven with elements of power, betrayal, and ancient knowledge that extended beyond the boundaries of what the survivor had ever imagined. Uncovering these hidden truths was both enlightening and devastating. The survivor discovered that their ancestors had made sacrifices and deals, some spoken, many unspoken, that contributed to the family's cursed fate. They learned of forbidden rituals, clandestine pacts, and the presence of forces that operated in the shadows, influencing events from behind the scenes. These revelations reshaped the survivors' understanding of their family history, revealing a depth of complexity that defied the simple explanations of tragedy or accident. The weight of these secrets pressed heavily on the survivor, who realized that the truth was both a key to survival and a source of immense danger. The hidden truths also shed light on why the survivor had escaped the fate of their siblings. There were clues suggesting that their survival was no accident but the result of something deliberate, an intervention, a protection, or perhaps a hidden purpose yet to be fully understood. This notion brought a mix of relief and burden, as the survivor grappled with the implications of being chosen or marked in some way. It raised questions about destiny, free will, and the roles each family member played in the unfolding drama. The survivor had to navigate these uncertainties while continuing to seek answers and confront the darkness that haunted their lineage. This deeper knowledge also fueled a growing determination to expose the full scope of the family's secrets and break the cycle that had doomed so many. The survivor understood that survival was not enough. They needed to confront the hidden forces head-on and bring the buried truths into the light. This meant facing not only external dangers but also the internal fears and doubts that had kept the family shackled for generations. The journey was as much about reclaiming identity and agency as it was about survival, a quest to rewrite the narrative that had long defined the Hollis name and to build a future free from the shadows of the past. The survivors' discovery that their family's tragic fate was intertwined with an ancient, unspoken pact shook the very core of their understanding of what it meant to be a Hollis. This revelation introduced a new and terrifying dimension to their quest, one that went beyond lost siblings and vanished childhoods, into the realm of choices made long ago by ancestors desperate to protect themselves and ensure survival. The pact, cloaked in secrecy and bound by forces beyond human comprehension, was both a curse and a binding contract that demanded price and obedience, weaving a complex web of consequences through every generation. Learning about this pact forced the survivor to confront the reality that the family's suffering was not merely the result of random misfortune but of a deliberate and binding agreement, one that had come with grave costs. This knowledge reframed every disappearance as part of a transaction, a toll exacted by something ancient and powerful. The survivor realized that the Hollis ancestors, in their fear and desperation, had entered into this arrangement without fully understanding the implications, or perhaps with the hope that their sacrifice would be a one-time measure. Instead, the pact had ensnared the family in a relentless cycle of loss, a debt that echoed through time and demanded continual payment. This understanding brought a mixture of dread and clarity. The survivor now knew that breaking free from the cycle required more than uncovering secrets or seeking justice. It meant confronting the very terms of the pact itself, facing whatever force or entity had claimed their family as part of its price. This was no ordinary battle. It was a confrontation with the unseen, the mystical, and the terrifying. The survivor was compelled to seek knowledge and strength beyond conventional means, turning to forbidden lore, ancient texts, and perhaps dangerous alliances in the hope of finding a way to nullify the pact's grip. At the same time, the burden of this knowledge weighed heavily. The survivor grappled with the sense of inherited guilt and responsibility not only for the disappearances but for the decisions made by those who came before. The pact was a shadow over the family legacy, but it was also a challenge to redefine that legacy through courage, sacrifice, and resilience. The survivor's journey became one of both reckoning and redemption, an effort to honor the past while fighting to ensure that future generations of Hollis children would not suffer the same fate. This quest demanded strength, wisdom, and an unwavering determination to confront the darkness head-on, no matter the cost. The survivor's path became even more complicated with the realization that their own survival was not just a matter of chance or protection but was tied to a unique role they were destined, or cursed, to fulfill within the family's tragic saga. Unlike their vanished siblings, the survivor had been marked in a way that set them apart, carrying a burden both profound and isolating. This role came with expectations and dangers that were invisible to others, shaping every aspect of their identity and purpose from an early age. It was a silent legacy, a hidden weight that informed their decisions and defined their existence. This understanding created a profound internal conflict. On one hand, the survivor felt a deep sense of duty and responsibility to their family's legacy, to uncover the truth, to break the cycle of disappearances, and to protect future generations from the same fate. This mission gave their life meaning and direction, fueling resilience and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. On the other hand, the survivor struggled with the isolation and fear that came with this role. They were aware that being the exception made them a target, someone who had to carry the family's darkest secrets alone. This duality was a source of constant tension, a push and pull between purpose and loneliness. The survivor's role also meant that they had access to knowledge and experiences denied to others, clues hidden in family lore, whispers of rituals, and warnings veiled in cryptic language. This knowledge was both a gift and a curse. It gave the survivor a fighting chance against the forces that had claimed their siblings, but it also exposed them to dangers that were unimaginable to anyone outside the family. The survivor had to navigate a treacherous path, balancing the pursuit of truth with the need for self-preservation, often making sacrifices that others could not understand. This role fundamentally shaped the survivor's relationships and worldview. Trust became complicated, as the survivor often felt unable to fully reveal their burden to others. They learned to be cautious, discerning whom to confide in and when to keep secrets. Yet, this role also brought moments of profound clarity and strength. The survivor found purpose in their unique position, understanding that their survival was not accidental but a critical part of a larger, painful story. Through this lens, their life became a testament to endurance, courage, and the unyielding hope that one day the darkness consuming the Hollis family might be lifted and that they could be the one to bring the light. The survivor's journey was marked by an unyielding struggle to reconcile the horror of their family's past with the desire to forge a life of their own, one not defined solely by loss, fear, and the shadow of vanished siblings. This internal battle was a constant tension between holding on to memories that demanded justice and healing, and the need to break free from the chains of history to find hope and meaning beyond the darkness. Living as the only Hollis child to survive past age 10, the survivor carried a burden heavier than most could imagine, the weight of remembering what was lost, while striving to create a future not doomed to repeat the past. This struggle manifested in many ways. On one level, the survivor wrestled with the legacy of trauma, how to honor the vanished children, their names and stories, without allowing grief to consume every moment. The memory of those lost was a powerful force, demanding recognition and respect, but also threatening to trap the survivor in an endless cycle of mourning and fear. Balancing remembrance with resilience required a delicate and ongoing effort, one that shaped the survivor's emotional landscape and relationships. At the same time, the survivor sought to reclaim their own identity beyond the tragedy. They fought to be seen as more than a survivor, more than a symbol of a cursed family line. This meant carving out spaces for joy, connection, and growth, even when those things felt fragile or fleeting. The survivor learned to navigate the tension between vulnerability and strength, allowing themselves to hope and dream despite the shadows that lingered. This was a courageous act, a refusal to be defined solely by what had happened, and a commitment to living fully in spite of it. This balance was not achieved easily or quickly. The survivor faced setbacks, moments when grief or fear threatened to overwhelm them. But each time, they found ways to rise again, drawing on inner reserves of courage and the support of those who understood their journey. The survivor's story is one of ongoing healing, a testament to the human capacity to endure trauma and find light in the darkest places. It is a reminder that survival is not just about existing but about striving for meaning, hope, and transformation beyond the past's grasp. The survivor's journey was profoundly shaped by an increasing awareness that the very fabric of their family's history was intertwined with a dangerous legacy, one that extended beyond personal tragedy into the realm of hidden powers and shadowy influences that few dared to acknowledge. This realization unfolded gradually, often through moments of unsettling clarity and fragmented revelations that hinted at a force operating just beneath the surface of their everyday life. It was a force that demanded secrecy, obedience, and sacrifice, and it was this force that had claimed every Hollis child but one. As the survivor delved deeper into the family's past, they uncovered signs that the disappearances were not isolated incidents but part of a deliberate, perhaps ritualistic, pattern, an exchange between the Hollis lineage and something ancient and unforgiving. This exchange was not openly spoken of. It existed in cryptic warnings, old journals, and whispered conversations that only made sense when viewed through the lens of the family's curse. The survivor realized that their survival came with strings attached, a price that was yet unclear but undeniably significant. This added a chilling layer to their story, a constant reminder that safety was conditional and fleeting. This hidden legacy was both a source of terror and a call to action. Understanding that the family's fate was tied to this dark arrangement ignited a fierce determination in the survivor to break free from the cycle. But the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. The survivor had to navigate a labyrinth of superstition, fear, and half-truths, often questioning their own sanity and judgment. The weight of this knowledge was immense, but it also became a driving force, a reason to push beyond fear and isolation, to seek out allies, knowledge, and means to confront the shadows that had haunted their family for generations. The survivors' awareness of this dangerous legacy also forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about how fear can lead to desperation, how love can become entangled with sacrifice, and how the need for survival can compel families to make choices that ripple through time. It was a sobering realization that the Hollis family's tragedy was not just about external forces but also about the consequences of secrets kept and deals struck in the dark. The survivors' story became a quest not only for their own freedom but for the redemption of a lineage burdened by shadows, a journey to reclaim light where darkness had long prevailed. The survivors' existence was deeply entwined with the haunting knowledge that, despite all the pain and loss, they represented a fragile thread of hope for the Hollis family, a hope that everything might not be lost to the darkness that had swallowed their siblings. This awareness brought with it a profound sense of responsibility, a burden far heavier than mere survival. The survivor understood that they were the living testament to a legacy that teetered on the edge of oblivion and redemption, a beacon for a future that might finally break free from the devastating cycle that had claimed every other child before age 10. Carrying this hope was both empowering and terrifying. The survivor grappled with the weight of expectations, both real and imagined, that came with being the sole exception in a family marked by tragedy. They wrestled with the question of what it meant to be the last remaining child. Was it a blessing, a curse, or something far more complicated? This internal conflict fueled a fierce determination to not only survive but to understand, confront, and ultimately dismantle the forces that had decimated their family. The survivor's journey was no longer just about personal survival but about honoring those who had vanished and ensuring that their stories would not be forgotten. This hope also forged resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The survivor's ability to endure was intertwined with an unshakable belief that change was possible, that the cycle could be broken, and that the darkness could be overcome. This belief provided a guiding light through the darkest moments, fueling the courage necessary to face truths that were often painful and frightening. It was a source of strength that carried them through isolation, fear, and the profound uncertainty of what lay ahead. Yet, the survivors' hope was tempered by the harsh realities of their situation. They knew that the path forward would be fraught with danger, that confronting the legacy of the Hollis family meant facing forces beyond the ordinary, and that sacrifice would likely be required. But instead of succumbing to despair, the survivor embraced this challenge, finding purpose in the struggle and meaning in the fight. Their story became a testament to the power of hope, not as naive optimism, but as a fierce, enduring force capable of driving change even in the face of overwhelming darkness. Through this hope, the survivor carried the potential not just for survival, but for renewal and transformation that could finally bring peace to a family long haunted by loss.